Can you hear me now? We have sound. Okay, so turn on a light, and I'll come back and continue yelling at all of you. Yeah, the whole point of turning the light on was so that we could have actual light. Bam. One last adjustment. Hi, I'm sitting on my floor. As I was saying before it was pointed out that I have no sound, can you see me? Which way do I need to scoot? There we go. Anyway, we just got back from foraging in our backyard because we live right on a forest. So we went out to forage, and thanks. This is my messy apartment. Oh, look, I can actually... Here we go. Here we go. Oh, no, not that. That's my box of fun. My apartment is messy. So enjoy that, everyone. That's what it looks like. All kinds of shit on the table. Anyway, we just got back from foraging. We were practicing eating weeds because there's all kinds of things out there that we can be eating, and most of them are invasive, so it's not even like where you have to worry about harming local flora and fauna. So we went out and we got a bunch of dandelions, and we're going to be making dandelion fritters, and then we're going to be using the leaves for dandelion salad later. We also got wild garlic greens, so I'll be making some garlicky greens out of that. We'll basically just be sauteing them and then eating them. We picked up some nettles, and my thumb is still tingling from being stuck by the nettles. It doesn't hurt, it just is annoying. So I'm not sure if they're actually nettles, but they sure as fuck felt like it, so that's my guess. And what else did we get? Oh, and chive grass. We picked up some chive grass, so I'm going to be drying that and using the bulbs as garlic and the grass as chives. So that'll be nice. And I feel like we grabbed something else, but I completely spaced what it was. Anyway, I think we've got some hawthorn trees growing around too, so that'll be nice in the fall, and we can have some hawthorn berries. And really just beyond everything else, that's it. We're waiting for our gardening seeds to come in, and we're going to do some guerrilla gardening, and we're also going to do some back patio gardening. So there's that. You better like my floor. This is the best, fakest wood floor ever. So yeah, so right now that's all we were doing. And if the camera setup was a bit more mobile, which is what I was trying to do with the laptop, and I don't know why the sound doesn't work, and I don't really want to sit here and figure it out. I was gonna show you guys how to make the fritters, because they're so darn hard. But yeah, we're not gonna do that now. Not now. But one of the things I did want to talk about was food, and how one of the projects I've been working on is, game food. And food and archaeology are food in archaeology is kind of interesting because there's a bunch of different ways you can study the archaeology of food. You can do the thing where they take the pottery and they find the carbonized, I got you. They get the carbonized seeds and plant remains, and they identify them that way. So we know what, base components they were eating. We know they were eating corn. We know they were eating beans. Well, I guess we would say maize. We know they were eating reeds of some variety and that kind of thing. So that's one kind of food archaeology. Another kind of food archaeology is doing chemical analysis of the pots and the cooking remains. So, trying to think of a good example. Stop. Quit being a turd. So, like with the pots, they'll go in and they'll take an analysis of the residue of an ancient pot when they find it. And they can do a spectrum analysis on it, and they can figure out what the chemical makeup of the residue is. And from there, they can extrapolate what plants and food substances would have a similar chemical signature, and that's how they figure out recipes, basically. And there's been several that have been recreated, mostly beer, of course, beer and wine. But there's been a really neat. There's also been looking into old written recipes. There's. You're an asshole. There's one on the internet that is Pliny the Elder's sourdough starter, which is made out of crushed grapes, wheat flour, and water, basically. And it's a sourdough starter, so it's, you sit it and you ferment it, and then you use it as yeast, as opposed to actual yeast, because they didn't have dried yeast like we do, and then you make basically ancient sourdough out of it. And most interestingly, this is one that really gets me, is sometimes they can, like with the yeast, sometimes they can get yeast samples from the pottery. They can reconstitute it, basically, and start a ancient yeast culture back up again in the real world, in the modern world. And so they can then use that yeast to make bread and beer again with. So that's kind of cool. These are all forms of food archaeology, if you just came in. They are fake wood floors. They're nice fake wood floors. Anyway, so another kind of food archaeology that we can do is looking at a modern culture's food culture and learning about the recipes as they have been passed down. Of course, they're going to change a lot of recipes, especially with cultures that didn't value writing as much as ours did, they're going to be part of an oral tradition, or they're going to be part of a demonstration tradition. So it's not even an oral tradition, it's a watch what I do, and that's how you do it kind of a thing. So that's another form of archaeology of food, which the whole reason I've been rambling about this for the last 5 minutes is because I'm doing the archaeology of game food, and the game that I'm currently obsessed with is the Elder Scrolls, specifically the Elder Scrolls Online. And I've really kind of fallen in love with everybody except the Britons, the Redguard, and all of the elves except for the Dunmer, the Dark Elves. So I've really been kind of immersing myself in the way that their culture is being presented by the game. Now, I know this sounds so weird, and yes, I'm overthinking it. It's a freaking game, but Bethesda put effort into creating distinct cultures and culture styles and food styles for all of the different game races that you can play. Which, I mean, it's not in depth. It's deeper than superficial, but it's not like deep. But it's deep enough that I can do some pretty decent archaeology with it. And what I can do is, using the reconstruction model that I was explaining earlier, where you would talk to a culture group and trace a modern culture group, and you would trace their recipes back or their food culture back. We can do a very similar practice with the game culture, because we treat the game as if it is our informant, because it is, and so we can question the game about its food culture. Now, obviously, we don't have korma, and we don't have anything called salt rice yet in the real world. So actually, most of the ingredients, most of the exotic ingredients that they use, we don't have in the real world. So we have to find some kind of comparison if I'm going to recreate the recipe here in the meat space as opposed to the game space. So what I have to do is look at the various recipes. Like right now I was looking at the Ashlander yam loaf. Now if I type in yam loaf, if I type in yam loaf into the internet, I will get back what looks like a meatloaf kind of a thing. That's usually made with yams and lentils and a couple other ingredients to make a meatloaf looking thing. It's an Indian style food. Actually, I'm sure it's part of several other food cultures as well. It's a very simple recipe, so I'm sure there's lots of groups that if they had access to lentils and yams, which a lot of them do, they probably have a very similar dish. But the only one I found, the only reliable one that I found, was an Indian dish. But if you look at the artwork that's attributed to the Ashlander yam loaf, it's actually a loaf of bread. So that tells me that when I see that recipe and I see that it's made out of ash yam, which is yams, or a sweet potato, or that kind of a thing, I know that I'm looking at some kind of a potato style bread, which is a little bit more interesting. So that tells me a little bit more. Now, again, I can take this in two different ways, because you can make sweet potato or yam bread, which is a sweet quick bread, much like zucchini or squash bread, or banana bread for people that don't eat zucchini bread. Or I can make a potato bread, which is, depending on the type of flour you use, is a type of loaf bread that can be sliced or made into rolls. It's more of what we would consider bread, not a dessert bread like the sweet potato bread. So I have several options as to what I can do with this Ashlander yam loaf, because when you go into the game and you start picking items up, or if you look at the art that's associated to it, the icon art that's associated with it in the game, it just looks like a French loaf, like a baguette or a loaf of French bread is what I was trying to say. So that doesn't really tell me much. And in the game, they use the same food icons for several different things. The thing that comes to mind most is stew. And it doesn't even tell you what kind of stew it is. So you hover over the little stew pot and it just says stew. And then you're like, take the stew. And then it tells you what you got. And you could have anything from radishes and rice, which isn't stew, to stir-fried, what is it, the new one? Stir-fried beef and greens. Or you could actually have like a stew of some variety. So, but what you're going to get from that icon depends on where you're picking that stew up from. So if I'm picking it up from the Dunmar area where the Dark Elves and the Ashlanders live, it's going to be a different range of foodstuffs as opposed to if I were picking it up from Khajiit lands and Northern Elsewhere and Palatine, and that's going to be a different kind of stew or a different rotation of recipes. Anyway, I hope this is all making sense to everybody. I think it's really fascinating, which is why I'm making all these videos about video game food and all of that. But that also brings us back to why I was foraging, and one of the reasons that I was out there foraging is because in the game you have to forage for certain food ingredients, which means you're harvesting them wild off the land. So you only have available to you what is growing around you to make some of these recipes with. And I keep checking the chat, but the only person talking to me is Renee. So that the interesting part about that is, you know, if I'm basing this off of what's available to me in the real world, because I can't fabricate certain things, like what is bitter green? You know, what does that mean in the game? How is it used in the game? How would that translate into the real world? Or there's a particular dish called Ghanaian garlicky greens. Does that mean greens that have been sauteed in garlic, or does that mean like the mustard garlic that I just harvested out in my backyard? Is that what I'm actually eating it and I'm just sauteing that? Is it eaten raw? Is it cooked? There's no explanation for that part of the recipe, so what I have to do there is reconstruct the recipe based on the cultures that the game races are based on, which are completely up to interpretation, because Bethesda has never come out and said, you know, the Orsimmers are based on X, or the Ashlanders are based on X culture in the real world. There's definitely some stylistic hints, but I will give Elder Scrolls and Bethesda, you know, points for hodgepodging things together and mashing multiple things together to the point where, yeah, you can kind of figure out what the, like, base culture might have been, but then there's all these little things added in, plus stuff that they just make up. And, you know, it's great because you don't have to worry about, well, you don't have to worry about cultural appropriation so much, because they're not really appropriating any particular culture in the game. They're doing their best to create completely fictional cultures as best they can. But that also means that, like, trying to reinvent their food can be a bit tricky. So becoming familiar with, you know, local land harvesting, so that I know what would be available if I were to have to go forage for all of my food. Being vaguely aware of the parent culture, the base culture, and what their foodstuffs look like. Comparing game images with real world images of food helps. So basically I'm just trying to recreate all these game foods, and then I'm going to make them in the real world. Flour fritters are not a game food, so they're just one of the ways that you can eat dandelions, because dandelions are edible from tip to toe. And we're going to eat the leaves as sauteed greens later, and we're going to eat the flour crowns as fritters. I'm going to whip up some Bisquick, literally, and then I'm going to dip the little heads into the Bisquick, and I'm going to throw them on a frying pan. I'm going to fry them up, and then we're going to eat them, probably with some syrup, because that sounds good. But I'm checking time, sorry. I'm kind of surprised this isn't echoing. But anyway, so sorry that tea was late. I'll try to save some of my dandelion fritters so that I can show them to you tomorrow at tea, which will be... So, okay, before I leave, Breath of the Wild recipes, because my dearest friend brought this up. One of the things that got me started was Polyvore did a video. Nah, you should do it, trust me. I'll see if I can't find you the Polyvore video. They had this guy who recreated 100 and some recipes from the game. And he did it all in one day, which was a terrible idea, because on top of everything else, this guy apparently does not understand, like, how to cook, period. Like, doesn't even understand how to scramble an egg. So it was entertaining in that it was fun watching this guy continuously fail, but it also pointed out exactly what I didn't want to do in my videos. Like, I don't want to go in, try to cook all of the recipes from a game in one day. That's just ridiculous. And I mean, I'm not a gourmet chef, but I know my way around the kitchen, and I know how to substitute and pull a recipe together. So, like, just there I have more knowledge base than this poor guy did. The best part was actually watching him try to eat the things that he cooked, because some of them were just... I wouldn't have touched them. I mean, it was like an abuse of ingredients. So that was terrifying. But I do need to see if I can't find it for you. It really is a very entertaining video, but in the scale of what I'm trying to do and what they did, they're like two completely different things. However, if I ever get done with Elder Scrolls, or I get to a point where I'm tired with Elder Scrolls, I was actually thinking about doing the Breath of the Wild recipes, because he said there was like, there's like a couple hundred or maybe 150 some odd recipes, and they all sound really good. And they're all based off, those ones are based off of actual real world recipes, so it would actually be pretty easy to try to find the recipes they're based off of. There are some with fantasy ingredients, and the fantasy ingredients, like I was talking about with Elder Scrolls, that's actually where all the really interesting things happen, because now you're trying to recreate the fantasy ingredient in the real world, which means you have to study what it looks like in the game and how it's interacting in the game and the ingredients that go into it in the game and blah, 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 blah. And then hopefully you magically create a recipe that is edible using real world ingredients, but still is recognizable as the game food. So, anyway, so that's what I've been doing. That is my quarantine obsession, is game food. I will be talking about this, I believe on Thursday. We're going to have a Still Digging episode. I think we're filming it live. Hold me to that. If we are, I will invite everybody to come watch it then as well, because this is so much fun, and we're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics, but my topic's going to be basically what I just got done telling all of you people, so only I'll probably actually have some food to show you, and then I'll eat it while you all watch and are jealous of the delicious food that I am eating. But anyway, I will see everybody for tea tomorrow, hopefully at 3 p.m. Like always, 3 p.m. EST, same bat time, same bat channel. It was just late today because we were out in the woods. I wanted to get out there before the sun went down so we could actually see what we were doing. And yeah, so that's my excuse for late tea today, but tomorrow we will have regular tea at regular time. And thank you everybody for showing up. Dinosaurs are real. I got nothing for you, and archaeology is awesome. So talk to everybody tomorrow. Oh, by the way, stay in your houses and wash your hands, damn it, and wear your masks when you go out.